What do you think is the main improvement in GPT-5? You wrote a really excellent post in August where you actually pushed back against Dwarkesh Patel's post, and your post actually blew my mind. Do you think that coding will become less of a thing and just familiarization with the AI systems and maybe prompt engineering is going to become more important? So if this type of intuitive use of AI models is going to become big, how would you integrate that into, say, an education system? You've made the point that the current systems are AGI. Robotics hasn't maybe kept pace with the software systems like LLMs. Do you see the division of labor remaining more or less the same, maybe in the medium term? Your blog is probably my main source of information about AI, and you have a really good signal to noise ratio. And I'm just wondering, how do you strike a middle path between, one side you've LLM detractors who say all current AI is rubbish, and then you've the other side who maybe pushes the superintelligence agenda. So how do you kind of strike a middle path there?
The how might be less interesting than why. I think how is kind of you have internal critics that are strong and be like, these extremes obviously cannot be real. I don't know what your background is, but I went to electrical engineering school. I wasn't a computer scientist, and realistically, the world could never you can never actually achieve a full exponential. There's always inertia and slowdowns. I think that and realistically, the media landscape right now rewards storytelling that is an extreme. I think I've been focused on the open models thing for a long time, and a lot of the reason that I think there wasn't adoption for years, at least in mindshare, is just that doom and gloom is a story that people are used to being told. Personally, and the how do I actually tread a middle ground is just a lot of internal dialogue of what do we think is actually going to happen, and there's smart people that are telling you all sorts of things. So you try to have enough sources that ground you. I think it's not that compelling of it's not that compelling of an answer. I'm just I tried to do the work and it just seems nonsensical, these other outcomes. I think I use AI enough to know that it has value, and you try to read, and there's some things that are easy to debunk on whether it's energy usage or things, but there's also just high level trends internationally, which is societies that have more energy to use tend to be better off. So it's okay, we have to try to build energy for AI. I think it's you can have both sides, because at the same time we want more energy, but it's obviously bad that all the big tech companies are rolling up generators that live in storage containers to just burn more natural gas. I mean, I don't want that to be the next 10 years, but it's where we're at right now.
Yeah. Could actually we just start talking about open source, because I know it's kind of close to your heart there. And I'm just wondering, so for people who don't know, what's the importance of open source for preventing power concentration and democratizing access to this technology and actually having safer models? Because I've heard you talk about all three. I'm just curious to, maybe for people who haven't heard this, what is the importance of open source?
Yeah, so we've seen this in how there's all these charts with NVIDIA has become a $4 trillion company, and all these big tech companies are just going strong while the rest of the economy is left behind. It's kind of an early sign of this. But if you take the stories that all these AI companies are telling to be just a few percentage true, AI is obviously going to be this super powerful technology. And I think there's going to be so much profit to be made from AI, and also just much like the iPhone is kind of the iPhone and AWS and their peers are things that every person needs to get through their life. And then AI is obviously going in that direction. And then the few people that make decisions on these super powerful technologies are the ones that effectively define people's lives. I think where AI becomes tricky is I think it's both going to be potentially way more profitable, and I describe it as being culturally salient. So you talk to ChatGPT in the text messaging form, which is just so close to people's hearts, and they there's no education of AI that is strong enough to overcome the natural bias towards it's nice when people say nice things about you in a text box. So the sycophancy of GPT-4o is always going to kind of get to the the core of what a human is. So then if you think super powerful companies and technology, and then just like human nature that you can't fight, in some ways it's just like openness is just like letting more people look into this and have more alternatives. It's like that's going to be the only. Sorry, I'm kind of mumbling through this, but it's just like
It's okay.
it's funny because it's a question I've had so many times.
Yeah. Do you think that China is, obviously there's several open models in China. Would you consider them way ahead of the US in terms of open models? And is that more out of necessity than design? It's just going to happen accidentally with the rise of DeepSeek, and then the government start to notice in China.
Practically speaking, if you look at any evaluation and usage, I've done all this research, like China is dominating the open model space, and they have been effectively since Llama 3, which was over a year ago, and they're just increasing their lead right now. Quinn and DeepSeek have been the backbone of this. Quinn is kind of doing the release so many models that anybody looking to try something with AI can start with the Quinn model. And DeepSeek was at this like pinnacle of achievement and technical quality that just made the rest of the world take notice. And there's kind of different approaches because AI does mean a lot of things. I think these language models like ChatGPT, the core text in, text out is say like 99% of what people think about right now. But there are other interesting use cases, whether it's image generation and editing or video. And Quinn has all of those. Like DeepSeek only has this like text input, text output right now, but it's just so good that everybody needed to notice. With respect to the government, I would say that the Chinese companies did this because it was the most logical path forward in terms of the resources that they had, the competitive landscape, kind of the business culture in China, where there's just much less of a service sector to sell these paid, like what would be an API platform in the US. It's just like that type of dynamic is much rarer in China, or they spend far less on it. So just kind of like the open, like there's many factors even before we talk about anything on the government side, which I think the Chinese government is like, they see like, oh, we stumbled into an easy win here. Let's make sure that keeps going. But I think that it's just kind of, Chinese AI companies were behind the US companies, and the easiest way to get mind share is just give away your technology for free, and it gives very fast iteration speed, I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I work with plenty of people who are Chinese, and a lot of them just like talk to people at these labs, and it's like they're pretty forthcoming. Like the Quinn team is pretty forthcoming, and will just tell people to like some researcher in the US that asks a question, and that knowledge share is definitely happening within China. I think it's like I'm
Interesting.
reading. Yeah, you can go.
Sorry. I actually read your most recent blog post, and I think you said that something like approximately 80% of American companies are actually using Chinese models. So through an API, is it like, I think that was actually reported in The Economist as well. And should that be worrying, or?
That was a quote from The Economist. It was Martin Casado. He was saying that like 80% of his portfolio companies at A16Z, which they're all doing AI. It's all AI right now. Like 80% of those are built on some Chinese model, which is something I've heard for a while. I won't name names, but I've talked to people at some of the most prominent AI startups that you could hear of. Like some of these startups that are raising billions of dollars and have no products in the Bay Area, they're just building their demos on Quinn and stuff like this. So I've been hearing about this for a while, and I stuck onto that because I was the first person of like somewhat authority making a numerical claim on it. And it's kind of this weird dynamic because all the Bay Area startups are building on these Chinese models because they're just malleable and effective in a variety of sizes, where more established businesses like banks or healthcare industries are like, we can't touch these for IT reasons. So it's like, I think it's just going to keep going, where there's these new startups that are trying to be disruptive, and these older companies that are going to be stuck with like less good AI. The Microsoft Copilot is the prime example. It probably has hundreds of millions of users, and then if we were to go use it, it'd be total crap compared to what we could get on many other services. So that dynamic is also something that relates to your first question, which is like a lot of people who are AI is fake are exposed to the free AI that is forced upon them, and not the AI that enables their agency and kind of entrepreneurial spirits to do research that is inspiring to them and not just clocking into a 9 to 5. So it's like a lot of people, I didn't coin this, but a lot of people say that it's just like AI rewards agency. And that's what these startups are doing, is that these models are very capable and cheap in many ways.
Yeah, I was actually reading about, I think it might be a newer model, Kimmy 2, and I think it actually has a smaller set of parameters, but through a very effective post-training, it actually achieves quite impressive performance, even comparing to some larger models. So they're obviously big on post-training techniques as well.
Yeah, Kimmy K2 is actually a big model. It's like a trillion
really?
parameters. But it's the thing that you're probably remembering is that it wasn't a reasoning model. So
Okay.
it's similar to Claude in that way. I think that there's a lot of nuance on the difference between a model like Claude, which tends to not think as much, compared to like what was OpenAI O3. We're very early in the definitions of that, and it largely will fork by use case and how much time. The use case determines the expectations in return time that the user has. And when there's open-ended expectations in time, like most of my use cases, I just punt to GPT-5 thinking, and I'll go read the report in 5 minutes. It's only really coding that I want it to be fast. So it's like, it seems like companies, if they're trying to serve general, need to serve all these niches. And the Chinese models, they kind of have different ones pop up for different things. So like that Kimmy model is the closest kind of Claude analog that we've seen. And then DeepSeek released their V3.1 model, which is like a hybrid reasoner, which also might be closer to that. But changes too fast. It's like a lot of people have whiplash on, you can attribute too much to one release when it's going to be irrelevant in like 2 weeks.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned GPT-5 there. What do you think is the main improvement in GPT-5? Is it the kind of auto routing system? And would you consider it more, I think you've made this point, I think it's in the GPT-5 system card as well, that it's now more of a system than like a model or a model on its own, because obviously it routes between different models. So is that the most impressive improvement?
The primary point of GPT-5 was to get their books in order and give like what is realistically a gigantic improvement in quality to hundreds of millions of users. Which, if your mission is to like bring AI to the world and be the company at the forefront of that, it's very successful. I think it's much more complicated to people like me that look at the like absolute bleeding edge, as we're trying to see 3 to 6 months out from very noisy information. And the GPT-5 release in that regards is on trend, a little underwhelming, but also like it's like somewhat orthogonal. Also, it's like, I don't know, but I'd already somewhat given up on the like ASI line, but plenty of people think superintelligence is a thing. It's like, there's kind of these two forks, which is normal people, GPT-5 massive success. Lots of other people are like disappointed. But
do you think the release of GPT-5, do you think it's dampened the superintelligence narrative a little bit?
It has. If the way that I would say this is, plenty of smart people that I think are very well intentioned, but are full on the like superintelligence soon bandwagon, came out and were like, GPT-5 is extending my timelines, which I don't understand how they had their timelines to begin with. But a lot of people said that, and I think it's good for people to not have that be the driving narrative, because it's just not very practical.
Yeah. Do you think so? I actually think I heard Dylan Patel, and maybe somebody else will make this point, that ChatGPT 4.5 was actually a better trained, or maybe a bigger base model, and that ChatGPT 5 might actually be a smaller base model, but obviously just heavier on the RL stuff. Do you have any suspicion about or speculation about what is the main base model? Obviously, it routes between different models, but on the biggest version of the extended thinking, do you think they're using a scaled down version of GPT 4.5?
I think the best guess is that it's closer to GPT 4.1.
Okay.
Anyone that's hearing this naming scheme for the first time with this podcast is about to like rip their hair out, which is a whole other model that they had. I think GPT 4.5 is phased out. In the coming years, we're going to have models of that size, especially as the distributed infrastructure starts to make post-training iteration speed a lot faster in these kind of reasoning time techniques. It just seems kind of ahead of its time on the cost to serve. And NVIDIA's cranking the cost to serve equation down by multiples every year. I was one of the people that use GPT 4.5 a lot, and I don't really see any behavior comparable to that in GPT-5, where it's like GPT-5 is like a mix of a super fast, decent, like GPT-4 model, and then like a O3 improvement. And it's like I mostly just stay on the thinking side of things, which I think is very good. It's very reliable, but it still has that like basic idea of ChatGPT built into it. But if you use these much bigger models, you could pick up on it if you're looking closely. It just doesn't have that kind of like cringe factor.
Yeah. Do you think its search is as good as O3? Because I do think the O3 search was extremely impressive.
Yeah. It serves the end case. So it's sort of like it still can do everything that I would want O3 to do. So I think it is just kind of a slight improvement over it. I think O3 was like a weird model. So sometimes it would just do really, really odd things that I think are memorable. And GPT-5 thinking is just, I think, a bit more well-rounded, which is seen by like GPT-5 Pro is much better than O3 Pro was. So I think people become very attached to these models, where O3 was something that me and many people really loved, that when I squint, GPT-5 thinking is so similar. It's like it could be like effectively the same thing with minor improvements, and I wouldn't be surprised.
Interesting. Yeah, a strange thing about O3 was that, so if you ever got it to like a sample of its writing was extremely strange. Like if someone hasn't actually seen an example of it, I can't describe it, but it was like trying to fit as much information as possible into this really concise text, but it was almost unreadable. But then GPT 4.5's writing was excellent. So yeah, do you have any thoughts on that? Like, is it that maybe it just it didn't have the right fine tuning for that?
Yeah, I have a pet theory that I haven't found the right way to get out, that I think a lot of post-training techniques make writing kind of muddled. Because they're trained to reduce to some average notion of preference, and the average, like, oh, that was good writing out there in the world is like copywriting for New York Times. It's just like that's what most people read, and it's fine, but it's not compelling. And like I think GPT 4.5 would be called as being like undertrained. So there's colloquially understanding that like the bigger the model you have, the less training it needs in post training. So it could be that like GPT 4.5 was just pretty light, and it just lets this richer model be expressed to the users in ways that most people don't get to see. But starting to border on more speculative than I can actually back up.
Yeah, and interesting. In terms of like the near term or medium term gains, are most of them going to come from the post training side of things? So maybe more RL, better RL, and scaling that up rather than a bigger base model, because obviously it's probably like the models have used all internet data. So without synthetic data or maybe bigger GPU clusters in the US, you probably won't get any more gains except in the post training side. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the definition of post training always continues to grow. I think a few months ago really realized like scaling is like really done on the user side, because we still have like the same, like GPT-5 is a similar size, Gemini 2.5 Pro Gemini 3 Pro is rumored soon. Claude has the same. Like all of these are releasing the same model size over and over again, and like those are the paradigm setting AIs. And it's not like we never got whatever, like Gemini Ultra. Like it never got like some of these models that we know were trained were never released to the user, and that's because the like price per improvement, at least to the like the users that are paying, is negligible. These bigger models are definitely being used internally to train, so like you get a lot of synthetic data for them to train these smaller models. And for that regards, I do think people will keep scaling up a bit, but most of the gains are on these general notions of post-training. And it also gets somewhat messy because it's just like figuring out how to wrap the models in the right agent. I think the example that I give is you take the same Claude model and you use it in GitHub Copilot, in Cursor, and in Claude Code. And Claude Code is just honestly multiples better than, I would say that it's almost like Claude Code in certain circumstances is twice as good as Cursor Agent, which is like 4 times as good as GitHub Copilot. And they're all using the same model. And in that regards, that shows that there's a lot more to get out of these, but also it's just like, is that really a modeling improvement? Like making the model easier to use is like such a benign description of an improvement. Like it's not a technological breakthrough, but there's so much more opportunity there than spending another $100 million on your training compute, where it's like, oh, maybe we just have to prompt it right. So we're mixing both of these in the current trajectory of AI, where OpenAI has this $300 billion Oracle news at the same time as what I just told you about. Like, it's like just prompting. It's like, I think that this is the same, goes back to your starting point. This is why it's hard to keep up with what's going on. It kind of doesn't make sense.
Yeah, because when you really get into the post-training side of things, there's a lot of techniques that it is actually hard to keep up with it unless you're following it constantly. I was actually curious about something, and again, this is hypothetical. So obviously, when DeepSeek first hit the scene last year, I think was it February or March, one of the techniques they used was a mixture of experts approach, where the model routed different experts inside a large model. But do you know, or do you have any speculation on whether any of the American frontier labs are using that? Is everything at the token level? Or sorry, the prompt level?
Oh, I see. So it's almost all these models at the frontier are pretty much using this mixture of experts architecture, which does this per token routing. DeepSeek really, why it has, I think, so much technical credibility as being quote unquote like an innovative frontier lab, is that they were releasing papers in models before this one in January of this year of 2025. They were just showing their fundamental research. And like they actually released this updated MOE architecture months before the thing that actually like tanked the stock market. And that architecture has become a sort of default, at least across open models. So Quinn looks similar, other Chinese labs look similar. One of the Llama 4 models was similar. At AI2 where I work, it's like we want to get like that's our starting config that we're trying to work on. And it's like that was just that was a DeepSeek architecture innovation well before this. But like the mixture of experts thing is just a fundamental trade-off where to put it simply, you get like a 10 to 30% gain on compute for performance. So that's the type of people, like some people call this like an algorithmic innovation or whatever. But compared to dense, which is where you don't have this per token routing to different subsets of the model, it really becomes that big of a performance boost. So long as you solve the engineering problems. What it practically is you know your ceiling is higher when you use this mixture of experts architecture, but in reality it comes with 2x or higher engineering challenges where you just kind of have to pay and spend time to get through this, and all the leading labs have done that.
Okay. Interesting. And if multiple AI agents were working together, I think you've discussed this, like to deal with one prompt or request, would that look very different to a mixture of experts model?
Yeah. So a mixture of experts model is really all about like figuring out how to get the best prediction like per token. And there's all this So this kind of MOE routing happens multiple times on the inside of the model. And it's one of the many somewhat unfortunate naming schemes where a agent with multiple agents is kind of a whole type of scaffolding that's being defined on top of these models, which is in some ways looks like a new type of computer where there's going to need to be some shared memory source and some way for the models to distribute tasks and break them down. Whereas like mixture of experts at a technical level inside the model is just it's a fancy formula for computing the next token, while the other thing is like open-ended systems design.
Okay, interesting. So you wrote a really excellent post in August where you actually pushed back against Dwarkesh Patel's post, and your post actually blew my mind. And after playing around a bit with ChatGPT, I was kind of like, he's right, because you talked about how like the current systems, just through amending what we have, like we don't need an entire new paradigm to get something approximating continuous learning out of these models. And I've actually found with ChatGPT 5, I think you're on the money there, because the cross-chat memory has definitely made a difference in terms of my own personal workflows. So could you just talk about like what amendments or what tweaks could be made over the next maybe 12 months to improve the continuous learning out of the current models even further?
Yeah, so the number one thing that I'm both trying to do and I think that needs to be done is we need to figure out how to get all the context actually into the models when people are using them for very serious like knowledge work domains. I think if you open Claude or ChatGPT, they tell you about all these integrations that they have, so you can connect Gmail and Box and Dropbox or whatever. But most people don't use them, and most people don't organize the information in a way that the like chatbot actually understands them. And we've seen, for example, for some numbers, we've seen the context length of these models get way longer. I'll talk both about context length, which is the number of tokens that you could put into a model and have it generate something out, and then context in general, which is just like information that you can hold. And the naming is linked because you put one into the other. For example, it's like GPT-5 has 400,000 tokens of context, and when I've like summed up every single blog post I've written on Interconnects, which is like a few hundred posts, it's like about 400,000 tokens. So if the information is organized to the model, I'm willing to like my argument is I think there's actually a lot of things that it could understand in there that I'm not going to be able to pull out, especially when you take the models that are like 12 to 18 months down the line. But no one actually does this. It's kind of like a pain to actually give all the information to these models. And the idea is that I would like to see what is like Claude Code, but for people's intellectual lives, and try to have like, how do you actually put your entire digital life in the work sense into one of these models and tell it how it's organized? But no one's done this. And I think as people try it, they're actually going to be much better kind of aids for processing what you have done, and what you're doing now relates to it. And I guess we could have covered this at the beginning, but the whole motivation is Dwarkesh was like, an AI can never do some of these little tasks that I do for my blog, or it'll never learn. And I just think that it's like, A, no one has really tried it, and B, the models are still getting better. So it just kind of seems like a weird position to die on the hill of like, this can't work, when it's like so many things that have happened in the last few years are things that just seemed unthinkable to just start working with AI. So that's why I've started playing with this, where I set up a repo with all of my blog posts, and I was trying to figure out the right way to have these language models search them and stuff, to do things like find the right quotes to insert. Be like, I'm writing, and be like, I wrote about this 3 years ago. Like, can the language model find the right quote to summarize my argument from the past? Because I don't remember all the posts I wrote. So I'm trying to set these up, and it still feels, it's obviously too early where it doesn't work automatically. But it's like, it seems so obvious to me that the models are going to still get so much better. if you work on the ground, you see how much low-hanging fruit there is. So that was kind of a mouthful. I'll let you process a follow-up.
No, interesting. Yeah, it was actually that post really got me thinking. And I had noticed with ChatGPT 5, the cross-chat memory is impressive, and obviously the context window as well is much better. So in terms of your own like say when you're writing, how do you actually use these models? And do you just stick with one model, or do you have like a pet model for a different task that you go to? So do you, I guess you cross use different models?
Mostly I'll use for in terms of doing research, in terms of finding things, like if I want to find a paper or some reference or get some intuition, I'll use like GPT-5 thinking and ask it about this. That's background, and then I don't really use them for writing. So I think a lot of my posts are actually like fairly off the cuff. So like my AI usage is relatively light, but then I'll do like a typo check, which I actually use a variety. I'll normally use 1 to 2 of like Gemini, Claude, and ChatGPT to just list typos in it. I think that is the most direct answer is the GPT-5 thinking, which was O3 for just finding stuff and like finding the right references on the web has been the most useful addition.
Yeah, interesting, because so when I do write, like personally, I find Gemini to be a bit of a boring model, but it seems to be pretty on the point with proofreading and things like that. I'm not sure how they did that, but with certain things, I trust its accuracy more than some of the other models.
I've found using Gemini that I think it's taught to reason per line. And then when you pass in something to check for typos, its reasoning chase is literally like, let me look at this sentence. Let me look at this sentence. Let me look at this sentence. Where I don't know if the other models are that structured.
Interesting. Okay.
So I've dumped like crazy long things into Gemini and kind of broke it, where it's like it would the output would look like would be like no typos in this sentence, no typos in this sentence, and just enlist them. So I was like, oh, okay, it's kind of clearly just trying to break it down line by line, which is great for typo checking in some things, but just wildly inefficient for other things.
Yeah, interesting. I just want to pick your brain on something, actually, or get your view on something. So I've heard people, like, I think I've actually heard Tyler Cowen make the point that, say, down the line, that people who work with AI systems won't actually need to know how to code. They kind of have to know the AI in like maybe an intuitive way, like a horse trainer or something. So do you think that like coding will become less of a thing, and just familiarization with the AI systems and maybe prompt engineering is going to become more important? Because I've been thinking about this, and I don't think I actually know enough to have a really good opinion. Like, do you think coding will be more niche?
Yeah, I think having an understanding of distributed systems and how the internet and everything works will be far more valuable than being good at writing code. Because the LLMs are really good at solving really narrow tasks, and somebody that like understands systems is going to be able to give them the right task, versus somebody that's like, build me a internet company and just give it your credit card and go sign up for random database companies and stuff. Like, that sounds a lot worse. And so, I kind of agree with it. I think
interesting.
It's
okay.
Just like,
So if this type of like intuitive use of AI models is going to become big, like how would you integrate that into, say, an education system? Because like obviously education systems are really slow to move at university level, at whatever level you want to talk about. So, like, what would be a good way to do this? Like, because obviously people will have to be able to use them, or they're going to be completely, they're not familiar with them, and it's going to be hard to match people who are.
Yeah, so there's like the practical world, which is how education policy actually works, which is very hard. I don't really know.
Okay, so let's say like let's say your utopian vision of it. Like, how would you perfectly do it? Like, would every class integrate an LLM? Like, would every student have a device with access to an LLM for every single subject, or would it be more isolated than that?
I think we're ultimately some part of like the classic liberal arts education is going to be extremely valuable, which is just like teaching people how to articulate their ideas and how to break things down. But at the same time, it's kind of more of, you almost just need to find people to help people find what is exciting to them, and just remove obstacles from in front of them and just let them run with it. I kind of think of it as like, I always hated English and writing classes as a kid, but now that I have something that I'm interested in, I'm like a successful writer. It's like, I want to go back to my like high school English teacher and be like what do you think of this? But the lesson is that like the best writing class would be one where everybody can find something that they're really into, and then you just turn the crank of like learning to find your voice. I've talked about this as buried somewhere, but I think that it's just really hard to develop a voice until you find something you're passionate about. And writing without voice is kind of just like manual labor. But when you're kind of doing this dance between what is in your head and how you think and the paper, it's actually a really fun practice. But none of the writing classes I had in my education enabled this. So the radical like utopian education thing is like, how do we actually keep the social norm setting, which is good about education, while accepting that people like should just be like kind of free to do a lot more of what interests them? It's probably not entirely new. I think when people realized the internet was a thing, they're probably like, kids can now learn about whatever they want. And this is obviously far easier. To like thinking about how to strike that balance is what I would say. I think that realistically, you shouldn't withhold the technology on the basis of accommodating old education practices. It's like,
Yeah.
you have to go forward, but that's obviously with challenge.
Yeah. It's an interesting point. So like, yeah, so obviously like LLM use and AI should be included in the education system, but still people need to learn like how to articulate their ideas. So maybe there should be a split there where some of it is still pen and paper perhaps, and some of it is...
a lot of us talk about this because I'm relatively close to the education system. It's like AI2 is very academic, and it's just like, if I was a college professor, I'd be like, well, grading scheme is 50% blue book exams where you write everything and it's no AI, closed book, and like participation and maybe quizzes. It's like homework is no longer a tractable domain.
It's
like
not
cheating
feasible.
is too easy.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like rolling it back in some ways, because I feel like that's what education used to be like. And
yeah, that's fascinating.
That's the only way.
Yeah, that's kind of like counterintuitive to what you'd imagine. So I'm just curious. So you've made the point that the current systems are AGI, and I've heard other people make this point. I think it's a very good point. I probably agree with it. I've heard Tyler Cowen say this as well. I've heard some really smart people say this, but like a lot of people think this idea of agency or autonomy in the model is necessary, and people are kind of obsessed with this idea. The model needs to do external planning or make its own choices, or I don't know, taste food. Well, maybe not, but like, why are people obsessed with an agency? Like, why does that have to be necessary if the AI is obviously excels past us in many ways? Like, is that not a general intelligence?
So it is a general intelligence, but people are kind of like, as you said, attached to this agency thing. And I think a lot of this is kind of goes back into the lore of AI and like an idea of an agent that is autonomous in the world. I'm very sympathetic to it. The reason that I say AGI is already here is just to reinforce the like the bountiful value that we have to tap into with these, which is they're far more general than humans and probably just a bit less than peak intelligence. So the definition of the word, it is true. But also it's like, I mean, so much of AI, for better or worse, is ideated by this drive for like what can be and what you could build. And if you were to like, yeah, and from that regards, I understand the agency regard, which is like, what is a system that can be dropped into a world that has never seen and still create order? And like, especially in the deep RL literature, there's a lot more on this, and it goes very deeply, like it goes very deep in that literature. And I think that's kind of the modern conception of AGI from these companies. Is this something that has agency? So like people also tap into that, like, that's what human is, but I don't even really think that the agency isn't necessarily like the intelligence that humans have. It's hard to describe, so you could give people slack. It's like how else would you describe what a autonomous problem solving thing is? It's like okay, like words can be very hard.
Yeah, it's interesting, but at the same time, it's a little bit like counterintuitive because the current paradigm we're on, like it obviously won't give rise to those type of things. Like maybe the whole emergence thing might be a little bit overrated because like we're not going to get those type of agentic systems that have that level of autonomy out of the current trajectory, are we? Like that's going to have to be a completely different architecture. Maybe neuromorphic computing, like that's a long way away, I think. But maybe I'm wrong. What's way now?
It goes back to the continual learning thing. It's like if a language model knows enough about the world, I think it actually can react pretty well if you hand it the information in the right way, especially when the models have more modalities or are manifesting through a robot that can move into the world. It's definitely you need innovations to kind of make it fundamentally different, but I think you could get it to an approximation that is it'd still be such an interesting thing to have in the world, but so obviously limited that the like intelligence explosion thing kind of seems nonsensical, which is in many ways good for me.
Yeah, I agree with you. I know your background. I think your background is in robotics, and it's just not something you hear enough about. Like I personally don't know enough about robotics. I'd like to know more. Like we're not. Am I correct in saying, from my very basic knowledge, we're not in the same level, or robotics hasn't maybe kept pace with the software systems like LLMs. We're still a little bit behind in terms of the nuance and what they can actually do.
Yeah, there's many arguments for this, but they all come down to the real world is hard and constantly evolving, where like the tokens in a language model are relatively known, or it's like there's enough in all of the history of text to react to any new piece of information in a reasonable way. That the physical world just has this complexity that is unruly, and it takes longer. I think these are not necessarily innovative points, but it's like we've seen it with self-driving cars and we're getting there. I think robotics will be similar. I worry that robotics doesn't have the same like consumer drive. Like ChatGPT is having so much progress because a billion people are using language models every day, but it'll be so long before a billion people use a robot every day to get these like flywheels on habits and discover what people will actually do with them and get all this data and get this kind of fundamental manufacturing efficiency that you'll need. I think obviously China is starting to make a lot of robots and that'll bring the cost down, which lets you get data. But there's just such a fundamentally different equation where I'm optimistic that things will work, but I think it'll be more out of sight from everyday life and start in the kind of manufacturing and logistics sectors. And I don't see myself buying a robot for my house anytime soon. Like I like my robotic vacuums, but they're just so constrained that they can be fun. Whereas like a general robot is just going to be such a nightmare.
Yeah, and as well, like how do you ensure that a robot has the dexterity not to bump up against you or hurt you or cause damage? I mean, I presume like a resilient robot doesn't have that level of fine motor skills yet. And like you said, if we don't have the data, because obviously the LLMs learned on written data, there's an abundance of that. But if we don't have that real world kind of psychomotor data, it's going to be very hard to get into that level. Like unless you use an artificial environment, I guess. And like I said, yeah, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I think the core argument, and there's all these humanoid robots that are coming online, and I've always been like skeptical of them and saying that like a robot that's more narrow to a specific use case is more likely to come into this world, which is true. But the argument for the humanoids is that if you make them cheap enough, they're going to be going into a world that the world is designed for humans. So there's less of a mismatch where they can then just kind of go into this world and collect far more data and have this feedback loop. I still don't expect that to happen rapidly, but that's like the most compelling argument for the humanoid robots is like, the world is designed for this form factor. Like we need to remove all the barriers to getting them out there as we can. And I'm sympathetic, but I expect it to be slow.
Interesting. On the hardware side, do you think China is far ahead of the US?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, you have to read the Apple in China book, which will give you the clear breakdown, which is that they have the willing workforce and an investment flywheel that makes them the center of cutting edge manufacturing, both in process know-how and in volume. And like they have the highest quality manufacturing and they have the workforce that can scale it to make it a high volume, and they're willing to take the environmental risk for industries that have second order effects. So it's like you can't you can't beat that unless you have all of them, or you're willing to spend far more money for geopolitical reasons to overcome it.
Okay. And I don't know if you've read the Abundance book by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, but they argue that kind of a deregulation agenda and just speeding up the pace of everything could allow the US maybe to do better there. Do you see that as a realistic possibility, and would it help the AI rollout into the economy?
It'll definitely help. So like there is too much red tape, but it won't solve the fundamental issues of workforce and like willingness to do things that kind of suck that Americans don't want to do. So it's like you're not going to get all the way to the China manufacturing level, but it would do a lot of good for just increasing the pace of what is happening in the US. There's all this money going to data center build outs and other things. So I'm supportive of it, but I don't think it's a panacea. So it's like in the right direction, but also kind of there are other reasons that the reasons that globalization happened. It's like you can't get around those.
Yeah, and they obviously have social engineering on a large scale on their side as well, which and the US values a more libertarian or personal freedom approach. Could I just ask you? So again, this is an area that gets a lot of hype. Is AI a risk? So I'm just curious, what do you see as like a possible realistic concern of the current technologies that we have, or maybe the trajectory we're on over the next 5 years? Like, what should we actually be concerned about? Because maybe if superintelligence doesn't happen, which it may not, where should our concerns really be?
Yeah, so don't worry about autonomy becoming too autonomous and too strong that it has distorted values. But there's a very long list of things that are concerning. I think that like cybersecurity and infrastructure reliability are obviously of concern because it makes, like I said, I should know more about security research, but if it makes software free and perfect, like it seems like you're going to be able to find more holes in software that was written by humans a while ago. That seems kind of obvious. And if you look at the American grid or UK grid, like it's very fragile and not ready for disruption. So I think that sort of thing where it's just like there are systems that people in the physical world rely on that are on flimsy digital infrastructure, that AI is obviously going to make it a bit easier to poke at. And there's other things from there. I think that people used to worry a lot about disinformation and misinformation, but largely it has turned out that is not a super big risk because language models are not that much better than paying somebody in Russia to be annoying. It's like it's kind of similar. There's a lot of media risk, so like non-consensual deepfakes are already a problem and are only going to get worse. And the nature of these is they're all like one-way doors. So it's like there are models on the internet that we cannot delete that make it easy to do non-consensual deepfakes. So it's now we have to like rebuild entire parts of the media ecosystem to make sure that that problem is contained. I'm like, that is a costly endeavor, and more bad things will happen before the digital infrastructure is fixed. And there will also be more things like this. So there's definitely a lot of challenges ahead, but I think that I don't see them as catastrophic in nature.
Interesting. And what about like things like social cohesion? Do you think that it could cause any issues there, or maybe political divides?
Yeah, so that's already well underway. I think it's like if recommendation systems can do that to people, an AI that is trained to make the user engage can also definitely do this. Which is like, I don't know how much more nuance I can add. It's like, it's going to happen. There will also be, I think a lot of the US dynamics are just, a lot of the country is rightfully feels left behind by developments. And like AI is now getting so much money and attention and is so powerful that'll be the new target. I think it had already been bubbling over with kind of big tech sentiment, and it's like it's a natural next target. Like I see why people focus on that as a very like a thing that feels sensitive to them.
Interesting. So one thing I'm curious about, and I think you might have mentioned or referred to this in a couple of your blogs. So obviously, one thing that we would like the current AI systems to do is to maybe advance scientific discoveries, but perhaps they're not there yet. So is like, what does that come down to? Is that a post-training thing, or is it a data thing where you have to build a model from scratch that's geared towards that in terms of pre-training data, parameter size, and on the post-training side? Like, how do you actually tweak them in a way that they will give us maybe new scientific insight?
There's a lot of philosophical angles you can take this depending on where you see science's arc kind of going. I think that there's different approaches that mirror that. So there's like the alpha folds of the world, and now when
Yeah,
the alpha fold
like
made into a
they're
company,
narrower systems though. Yeah,
yeah, and it's like there are companies that are building wet labs to like collect data to try to train LLMs on them and stuff like this. And those are a long shot. It's kind of like it, I won't say never, but on the other side, it's just like language models make it a lot easier to do science. So it's like if you strip away all the brute intellectual labor of being a scientist, it gives a lot more flexibility for people to try their ideas. And therefore, if people are just trying more ideas, I think the overall like rate of progress could increase. So I kind of see that as a fundamental engine of information processing and understanding, and that is something that we'll get. I I don't like. I go back and forth on whether or not an AI model can make a new discovery, because it can obviously output text that is reasonable, but you still need to go through the process of testing the hypothesis, and their hit rate is not going to be high because it's like, but they're still going to be able to get hits if they guess enough times. So it could
yeah,
be a kind of different nature than what people, excuse me, in terms of what people like associate as scientific brilliance, but they'll still contribute in many ways to progress. So it's just
yeah,
like less
yeah,
idealized, where like the scientist is idealized because it seems almost like fictitious in how this idea comes out of nowhere. Where
yeah,
a language model could converge on the same idea, but you can see exactly what it's doing and it doesn't look pretty.
yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So last question, I'll leave you because we're nearly out of time. How do you see, and again, you touched on this, I think, in maybe one or two posts. Do you see the division of labor remaining more or less the same, maybe in the medium term? And do you think maybe LMs, if they're adopted properly and used properly, could just increase human productivity rather than like half the workforce being laid off? Because it doesn't seem to be happening, even though I think Jeffrey Hinton predicted that certain professions might be gone by the 2020s, but it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, a lot of this has to do with institutions, where it's like institutions have a lot of inertia to prevent them being fully replaced. And therefore, like the only path forward is augmentation. And there will be extreme cases where, I mean, obviously in the trend of history, some careers go away. Like we don't have elevator operators anymore that are literally replaced with a really lame version of AI. So there are things like this, but for the vast majority of the people, it'll be the normal like evolution of the workforce that we see when new technologies come. There will probably be this weird dynamic of the haves and the have-nots, where the people that can spend the most on AI can effectively like not need certain types of work that would be needed. But that type of thing is never going to go to zero. When you look at these, we did get. I'm trying to learn the power numbers. It's like one GPU is like one microwave when it's on. So if you look at like these these data centers that have like a million microwaves in them, it's like gigawatts. It's like you're never going to get that to be free because there's just so much hardware, and this hardware is tens of thousands of dollars a piece, and they have failures at some like great. So it's like, these are never going to be free at the absolute top end. So there's going to be like that kind of economic forking won't be great, but it should be a minority of people, I would guess, that can actually afford to pay to win. I don't know.
Yeah.
Kind of a gloomy note to end on. But the core of it is that society will always changes relatively slowly.
Yeah, but it sounds like it might be on a more traditional technological path right now, from what you're saying, which might be a good thing.
I mean, at the same time, I literally tell people that I work with that like they should pay for these services because their long-term career arc will be better off for it. And it's like, there's second order effects of that just being like rewarding the people who have access to this, which is not great, but I don't know what to do about that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate your time. And keep writing the blog because, as I said, it's my main access to AI information. I really enjoy it. It's probably I think the best AI blog on Substack. So it's fantastic.
Thanks a lot. There's definitely a lot of competition there, and good luck with this project. It was fun.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks.